Who cares? Let's get going.
Okay. Ready? And 3, and 2, and 1. Welcome to the Upshot. I'm Patrick Russo. This
We're putting this in the intro. That's all right.
Support for The Upshot comes from the New York Times. The Upshot focuses on the recent political news of the day and is hosted by Patrick Russo and Tim Geithner.
Welcome to the Upshot. I'm Patrick Russo. This week, are the Democrats dying? Can the Republicans turn it around? Ever? Why have the plutocrats been so successful lately? How did Sudden Rush win the speakership election, and what will H.H. Prince George do next? Has Congress gone too far with the passing of the Judicial Branch Political Act? To help answer these questions, I'm joined by our co-host, Tim Geithner. So, Tim, let's jump right into dissecting the recent House election results, and then we'll move on to the Speaker election. So, one of the most significant things that I noticed was obviously the fact that the president, Sudden Rush, got a total of 141 votes, which some are claiming is the most amount of votes in congressional election history, and he blew everyone else out of the water because the second place person, a plutocrat, got 56 votes. So some are arguing that the president took a lot of votes that would have gone to other Democrats, which is why the Democrats experienced such a heavy hit in this election cycle. And it's also worth noting that the plutocrats across everyone that won got a total of 310 votes, while the Democrats got 269, and the Freedom Party got 40, and the Republicans had no winning candidates. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that it's kind of just more of a sign that things are moving in the direction of the plutocrats, and the Democrats' hold on Congress is just slipping away. And I'm not sure that they can blame Sudden necessarily for their losses. I'm not sure that the votes that came out for Sudden would have came out had he not been running. And if we subtract Sudden's vote from the Democratic total, you only get 128 votes for Democrats. So if we're being generous, then maybe they get like 200 votes total without him, but that's still 100 less than what the plutocrats got. So I think that there are important reasons that this happened. Number one, the leadership in the party seems to be more talk than action. I don't think they had any organizing. I don't think they were campaigning. And I think that hurt them. Number two, I think that people are just tired of the Democrats, and the plutocrats just seem to be more fun of a party. I was talking about this with some of my friends a few weeks ago, and they were saying that the plutocrats are more appealing because they're not as serious, at least on face value. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think one thing that I've heard from a few people is that the Democrats have had a pretty firm grip on Knights USA for a fairly long bit of time since the destruction of the Republican Party. The plutocrats have always been seen as a party in their infant stages. And what we're seeing right now is that people are saying, you know what, they did re-elect a Democratic president just a few months ago, and they just elected an independent who had very large backing from the Democrats, as well as the plutocrats, but more so from Democrats. And I think it says that the Democrats, and just like you said, lack the fundamental organization. And one thing from my experience in campaigns in this group is that it requires someone heading the DNC who is able to. The most important part, first of all, is finding candidates, because we see some candidates who actually won. The Democrats like Tobias or Alex Klein, who hardly broke 40 votes, and at the bottom of the totem pole. Then you have Democrats like Disson and Sudden, even more so, that are more attractive candidates. So first of all, it comes down to what kind of candidates they're running, and it just seems like in this election they weren't running the right representatives or candidates for the office to actually get them elected. And also it comes down to messaging and that organization. One thing that Vason's campaign was great at, and you have perspective on this as well, is keeping almost like a database or knowing they're consistent voters, and that really helps because it's one thing to go on the wall and go to Las Vegas and say, hey, vote for me, I'm going to do this, this, and this for you, but you need to know those consistent people who support you, and as soon as they indicate your support for you, you need to have their name down. You need to know that they'll vote for you and remind them to vote for you, because most people won't vote if they don't think about it. So I think I do agree with you. This comes down to a fundamental lack of organization in the party, and then also the fact that the candidates just aren't high profile enough. The plutocrats are small enough to where a majority of their members are more high profile. Like, I recognize a majority of the names of the plutocratic winners. But the Democrats, I don't even recognize a lot of the names they ran, and I've been in the group for a very long time.
Yeah, there's also the what plutocrats do, and I think this is why they're very good at getting out the vote, is on election day, they just hang out in game. And I've always told Democrats who seem to struggle to turn vote out after they get on the ballot, and I just tell them, like, you need to go to Las Vegas, stick there for 2 hours, and just get random people to vote for you. You can get a solid 40 votes in 2 hours by just doing that, but they never seem to do it. And again, this kind of is back about the lack of organization. I don't think the leadership in the party did anything for that. They seem to enjoy writing medium statements than actually getting their hands dirty and really getting, rolling up their sleeves and working. I think that you also have the problem of Tobias just switched party affiliation to plutocrat a few days ago. So you're seeing Democrats jumping ship. It's the same thing's happening in the Senate, and they're jumping to the plutocrat party. So the Democrats are just really splintering right now, and I don't know what they're going to do to get out of it. Though there is the advantage now they're an opposition party. They're soon going to be an opposition party. Mm-hmm. So now that the plutocrats control Congress, can they get a message together that harnesses on the advantage of being in opposition? Because when you control Congress, you often take responsibility for every bill that's passed. So the Democrats, if they're smart, they should develop a message that focuses on key failures by the plutocrats as they control this new Congress.
Mm-hmm. One thing I think is very interesting is, which we'll cover later in the podcast, about the president's election as Speaker of the House, just after his lame duck term is coming to an end. One thing that's very unique is that, so obviously the leader of a party is not technically the chairman, right? The leader of the party is technically the highest ranking elected government official. So just to put it in perspective, everyone know about, in real life, the Democratic leader is technically Barack Obama. On January 20th, it's really kind of up for grabs with the leader. It's kind of Chuck Schumer. He's technically the highest ranking. And then on the Republican side, you have right now Paul Ryan. He's the Speaker of the House. So, and then on January 20th, it'll become Donald Trump. So one thing what you're seeing here is that the leader of the Democratic Party is not changing. Right now, the president, Sudden Rush, is the highest-ranking Democratic Party official as the president. Then after his term as president is over, he'll become Speaker of the House, and from there, he's still the highest-ranking party official. So really, I think that there's a lot of pressure on Sudden, and I don't believe that this recent uptick in plutocratic support is his fault, because he has put attention towards the party, and he recently appointed a new chairwoman about a month ago in an attempt to revive the party a little bit, and it seems like that needs to be revisited, possibly the strategy of the party in general, but I think that the responsibility falls on Sudden's shoulders right now as he becomes Speaker of the House. He's no longer president. He's a little less responsibility to organize the party. Because one thing that you mentioned was the responsibility is on the candidates to get the vote out. But I think that there are a lot of it's asking a lot to run 10, 15 candidates from the same party and have them all be equally knowledgeable on running campaigns and knowing how to do it. Because if we want to actually listen to what the citizens want, and one thing that you talked about in the last podcast touched on was the fact that people want change. They want new faces. So if we want new faces, someone needs to step up and teach them how to campaign, teach them how to message, and teach them how to get out the vote. because this isn't some skill that everyone just knows. It's difficult, and it's not something that everyone's just born with. So I think that it falls on the party and ultimately on the president and future Speaker of the House, Sudden Rush, to ensure that we have, well, I say we, the Democrats have A, good candidates, and B, candidates that are well trained and know how to win.
Yeah, again, it's going to have to come down to the leadership needs to guide the candidates. And I don't think they are. Whereas the plutocrats, they're always guiding their candidates.
Mhm.
And again, this is just another sign that there is not a lot of leadership coming from the top of the party apparatus, and that's a problem.
Yeah, and I think just the last thing on this before we move on to a different party is that presently that organization does not exist in the Democratic Party. Mostly, I feel like it's in part because the party is a little bit larger. You know, the party membership is larger than the plutocrats. So we talked about last podcast that the plutocrats are a smaller group. So they tend to be more unified, where the Democrats tend to be more fractured, as we saw in the speaker election more recently. So it's difficult to get this large group of people, the Democrats, the largest political party in the U.S. right now, I believe, pit them up against a smaller, more cohesive political party that has been able to rally their troops and get themselves elected. So I think it'll. I guess we'll have to see what Sudden Rush does as Speaker of the House and leading the party. But I want to move on really quick and talk about the dynamic of the different parties in Congress, except for, well, excluding the Democrats, so focusing on the Republicans and the plutocrats we already kind of touched on. But
Well, I think the Republicans are just dead. And I really think they made a mistake electing Cody again. I like Cody, but he's basically led the party for over 6 months, and nothing has changed regarding their position. I don't know why they brought Eisner on. I don't know what he offers. But I really think Republicans are just in a place right now where there are no votes to come in, or there just aren't enough. They got 0 candidates in. Even Cody, when he was on the ballot because he dropped out at the last minute, he was not winning. And he is someone who should be able to win because he's been there for half a year now. I just don't think the vote is there. And I think they truly are, at least right now, a dead party. And I don't really know what they can do. I think the best option for them is to just wait, because sometimes the vote is just not going to be there no matter what you do. It's like when in real life, when Howard Dean announced he's running for DNC chair very briefly. Even if he was a great chair, the vote just wasn't there. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to agree with you, and I also don't understand why they brought on Eisner, whatever. I mean, he's kind of been in and out. He keeps saying he's going to quit, and then he doesn't. And I think we've seen a few characters like that. And ironically enough, the people I'm thinking of in my head right now, along with him, have also led parties in the group, but they seem to be the ones who come in guns blazing, and within a few days they're already gone. So in particular, I've seen Eisner announce he's leaving several times, and I think he's a fair bit older than most people in the group. I don't remember exactly, but and he keeps coming back. And I haven't really seen him add much value each time he comes back. I think the marginal utility of his presence is kind of decreasing slowly. And
I mean, I don't really think there is a utility of his presence. He's just
agree.
completely washed out. It's like Mourinho, you know? There's just nothing to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing is, just to build on your point, Mourinho, before you continue, that one thing that we see is that once someone's president, they kind of fade out. So I think that Sudden Rush is unique in that, he's been president for a year. That's a long time, both in real life and especially on Roblox, to hold the same position for a year. And, there was speculation he was not going to run for re-election. He finally did. We were all kind of surprised. And then, there was even speculation he would resign toward the end of his term and turn it over to his VP, whoever it was at that moment. And then now he's Speaker of the House. and he's kind of trying to keep his legacy going whenever he feels that he's done as president that he wants to protect. But in the past, look at Zayad or Lumidus or Mourinho. The one that I've seen make a significant comeback was Zayad, who rather made an attempt at a comeback, but hasn't been able to find his footing in the group since he was president. And he's won Senate a few times, I believe, like twice or so since his presidency, but he really hasn't done much. He usually ends up getting expelled for inactivity because he goes to boarding school, so he comes in and out. And then Mourinho, I haven't seen make a significant comeback. I was saying to someone today, all he does is kind of come on and complain on Twitter and get back off. And I'm not quite sure how productive that is. And then Lumidus came back as Secretary of State for a brief period. We know J.C. Mann came back for a little bit to run for president after being gone for a while. But I think this is really unique in that Sutton has come back to, and I believe part of it is that he feels like he can offer something to the party to continue his legacy and kind of build the party back up, whereas previous GOP presidents like Mourinho have kind of faded away. So I think we're in a very unique position here.
Yeah, we are. So let's start talking about the plutocrats. What do you think that Congress is going to be like now that they can pass bills without, they have the majorities now. They're in control of Congress. How do you think that's going to play out?
I think it's going to be interesting because I really don't know. We talked about this earlier in the show about how they're a little bit less serious than the average politician and Knight. And they've had a grip on the Senate for a little bit now. We've kind of gotten an indication of how they work, and I've seen a few of the sessions. They're not very serious. They've never been very serious though. But I really don't know what their platform is. It's kind of confusing to follow. I think that a majority of what I see is the whole women's rights thing, and I really don't quite understand how they came up with that. But in reality, I think that's going to be interesting because they did receive support from plutocrats. Actually, I was very surprised he did, and I think that he does have some friends that are plutocrats, or rather, some of his closest advisors are friendly with plutocrats. So I think that he'll be able to work with them. So I think that for the first time, we'll see plutocrats actually kind of have a seat at the table, because we had a Democrat in office as president who could veto any plutocrat legislation that was just seen as useless, at least in the eyes of the Democrats. But now we have someone in office. We have both branches of Congress in control of the plutocrats, and we have the president who is an independent who receives support from plutocrats. So I think that we're going to see a lot more cooperation. Whether or not that's to the Democrats' dismay or to their pleasure, we'll have to wait and see, I guess.
Yeah, I think that I'm worried about what happens to our foreign affairs with plutocrats. I know they're already starting to harass the State Department. They're issuing a subpoena onto Arium. They kept going to Hawaii's capital and harassing them. Which is why Hawaii issued a ban on Americans, and they don't seem to care about foreign affairs, and I don't think they know anything about it. So I am worried there. I think that we're going to see significant restricting of the State Department and its autonomy. So I know that Arium is working up a legal strategy so that he can keep appointing people without needing Senate approval, because the plutocrats apparently want to pass a bill that requires all State Department employees, regardless of significance, have to be approved by the Senate, which, in my opinion, is tedious. So I think otherwise not much is going to change, but foreign affairs wise, I think it's going to be very different, and I'm not sure that it's going to be better.
I think one of the most significant things also in terms of the plutocrats' control over the Senate is, Sutton hasn't made a tremendous amount of appointments since the plutocrats have had control over the Senate, but we have an incoming cabinet with almost completely new faces that all have to be confirmed by the Senate. We touched on this last episode that some nominees are being met with significant backlash. So I wonder how the president-elect works with the Senate. some of which supported him in his bid for the presidency, and who gets passed, who does not. And I also think it'll be interesting to see how Thason's agenda matches up with the plutocrat's agenda. I mean, one of the biggest things he talked about was basically making government work for the average American. And I don't think that's a big message for plutocrats, but I think that's something they can definitely get behind if Thason provides some leadership on that issue. But I do agree with you that the State Department confirmation on every appointment is a little bit ridiculous, and I think that the plutocrats attempt to essentially make it very difficult to operate within any department they don't control of significance. So the Department of Justice has long been plutocratic territory, and one thing is, I would think that Sutton, as the leader of the Democratic Party, would have wanted to attempt to shut out the plutocrats, but he actually has empowered them through the Department of Justice, through appointing them to federal judgeships, Supreme Courtships, and they really have a stranglehold on the judiciary, the Department of Justice, and they have that on lock, and that's not going anytime soon. So you have other areas, like you said, the foreign affairs, which they haven't quite gotten a grip on because their people are more legal. They like law, they like being legal bookworms. So I'm just kind of curious where they leech onto next and try to control a department. Not in a negative way, just saying that they have previously, like right now, they have a very firm grip on that area of the judiciary. But I'm just curious if they are content there, which I don't think they will be. But now they control Congress and the judiciary and the Department of Justice. Are they going to try to expand or just centralize their power a little more?
Yeah, I think that understanding the Rhodesian community requires unique perspective that I just don't think anyone really has in NUSA, because the community is still very much operating like it was in 2013, 2014. And none of them have ever, they just don't know how it works. And the same goes for a lot of Democrats and Republicans. So this isn't a plutocrat issue. So I am a bit concerned, but ultimately, Thason will be in charge of foreign policy, and I think that he will be able to get along with international countries. But what I do know is that countries like the UK will not hesitate to retaliate towards NUSA for the actions of Congress.
Definitely.
So even if Thason is very friendly and open, if Congress, via the plutocrats, starts harassing members of the British Empire and other countries in the community, they're not going to hesitate to retaliate. And so I do worry a bit. I don't think they value our recognition, which is a problem. And I think that a lot of people take it for granted because, as you know, because you were part of those negotiations more so than I was in 2015, that summer, but getting recognition was very hard. And it's something that we really need to keep a hold on.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things to be very interesting as well is, just kind of, this is off topic, but more focusing on the State Department opposed to just the plutocrats, but previously, the President Sutton Rush now has kept career diplomats in office, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Arium, he had Lewis in there for a bit. He had Terrence Walsh beginning of his term. He had Jack Rockwell for a bit. Most of the secretaries of state he's had have experience and they understand the landscape. But Thason has Lego Manwar, or Roy Petraeus, I believe is his new name, who was previously a representative, I believe, and current CIA director and ambassador. He is going to run the State Department. I don't think he's ever run an organization quite that large with his actions having so many unknown ramifications to them. I think it'll be very interesting to see how the president-elect's promise to bring fresh faces jives with the long-standing practice of keeping career diplomats in office, people who understand the landscape. Because I worked in the State Department under both Terrence Walsh and Jack Rockwell, and both of them have been in the community for a very long time, several years, and when they came, Terrence Walsh was a part of the taking back of recognition for NUSA over, at the time, APUSA, which just recently turned into EUSA. So, and I think that it is seriously under threat, and I think that it would take the slightest of action to have one of the big countries fall into a different USA's column, and then from there, I almost see it as like a domino effect, where if larger countries go a certain way, smaller countries generally follow suit, and with them go international organizations. So it's somewhere we have to tread lightly. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how the president-elect's philosophy on cabinet appointments, and in particular the Secretary of State, goes with previous long-standing principle.
Yeah, I mean, all EU really needs to do to have a shot at getting recognition again is getting rid of idiots like Dr. Gatsby. Because that's the only thing that's really holding countries back from even giving them a chance to vie for recognition again. Because countries are not happy with NUSA. They just aren't. I get a lot of grievances from people in the community, and they just don't like NUSA. They just see us as the lesser of two evils. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I do wonder how it's going to play out.
Yeah. And then, so let's go ahead and transition to the speaker election, which was just about to unfold after our last recording. And we had, initially, so just to give some background before we open up for discussion. So we talked about last week how Capitalized was in a very strange position to run for re-election as speaker, and he has stepped down, and he has said he would not rerun as Speaker of the House after the president entered the race. And then before the president entered the race, we had H.H. Prince George, who was running against Capitalized. And after Capitalized dropped out, it became a race between H.H. Prince George and Sudden Rush, both Democrats, in a plutocratically controlled House. So the election unfolded pretty interestingly, and there are a lot of parallels to draw between H.H. Prince George and some of the real-life political figures we have today in power. And I wanted to kind of dissect his reaction, his strategy to the speakership election. And I have his statement here I wanted to read as well, which, well, just only a portion of it. And I think when we hear this, it sounds very familiar. Just the first paragraph says, the speaker election did not go as planned. Major tampering, threats, and such actions took place during the election. The second anyone would vote for me, Sudden and his puppets would start messaging them with various BS to change their mind. I'll release every single proof I have so you can all see for yourselves. So basically, in this, he was threatening to uncover a lot of this political corruption.
Yeah, you can tell he's just very pissed. In the third paragraph, he says, I will be spending my following weeks drafting legislation. And then he says, and besides that, releasing to the public every single thing that happened in NUSA this year, parenthesis, absolute corruption, parenthesis, and everything said by tens of quote-unquote leaders and politicians. Nothing is going to silence that from coming out. And more than half of our politicians will be exposed and, frankly, destroyed by what they have done in NUSA for so long. I think that, I mean, you can just tell this was hastily written. He's very angry. And if you go through his Twitter, for weeks he was tweeting things like, yeah, get ready because I'm going to win. All these losers who vote against me will, it was very cocky. But he only ended up getting 2 votes.
It was not even close.
Tally. One of which was himself. I think he had a chance of winning when it was him versus Cap, but I think once Sudden came in, the plutocrats rallied around him, and he had enough Democrats who were with Cap to take it. I think that this is what I don't like about HH, is that he can't just relax. You know what I mean? In fact, Sudden and I had been talking to him a few weeks ago, and we were because he kept asking us for help, and we were like, man, you got to just chill out. You know what I mean? Like, stop tweeting edgy things and trying to be Trump, because it doesn't work. And quite frankly, you piss off a lot of people. And I think that his narcissism and kind of assuming that it would happen is what lost him the race. And I just don't think he's very well liked in the House. So it is interesting what he's going to come out with. And another question is to ask, well, why didn't he release this anyways? You know what I mean? It's kind of petty that if he has all of this stuff that proves corruption at every level of government across every branch, why is he just releasing it because he lost? It kind of makes you question who this guy is and where his priorities lie. And in his tweet of the statement, he says, "I am sorry to everyone, but no more Robux, robbing, selling positions." And this one's interesting. Pedos and so on. I don't know who's a pedophile in NUSA, considering we're all teenagers. But again, this is just the kind of tweet that it's that style that I think has turned off a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing was just very Trump-esque, and he's been operating very Trump-esque. I know that HH, I believe, I don't remember correctly, but lives somewhere in like Eastern Europe. I don't really remember.
He's from Romania.
Yeah, something along those lines, and he's always been a Trump fan. Really, I don't quite know why. I guess it kind of fits his personality, but and I think that we've seen a lot of people in news in the past when they get removed from power, their first threat when they see their allies abandon them is, I'm going to release chat logs, or so I've seen even people post on Twitter, should I release chat logs? Or I think that's a situation you saw unfold a few months ago with certain people, and I think that it's a situation that's it's very petty, it's very immature, and then it puts us where we are today, where that behavior almost becomes acceptable and almost becomes normal. And it's pretty clear that, and as you touched on, that he's saying, and I don't want to inject personal opinion. This is just something I've noticed out of just pure fact. So what he's saying is that he has bore witness to this corruption he's alleging, yet he doesn't want to point it out until he's no longer being served by that corruption, is the way that I see it. So, he's been saying for weeks and weeks and weeks, I'm going to win, all these losers, the establishment, etc. I don't think he quite understands what the establishment means, because he's about as establishment as it gets. But, it's... And now he's out. He's just a representative, and it seems like the House is against him. He got outvoted by a very wide margin, and I think that he's chalking the whole election up to, let me see the words he used, major tampering, threats, and such actions. I'm not quite sure what such actions are, but he is saying that basically because Sutton went around convincing representatives that is major tampering and threats. So I think that he needs to look in the mirror for a minute and say, well, maybe I didn't do a very good job outlining my vision. Maybe I didn't do a very good job getting grip on the House of Representatives as I previously had. But faulting a candidate for the speakership going around and whipping votes is not major tampering or threats.
Yeah, I think he's washed up. And he's going to grovel about it for a few days, and then he'll get over it. Or he won't. But either way, he's washed up. So with that closed, I thought that we should talk about our final subject, which is this new bill that's just been passed by Congress. It was proposed by Senator Apollo QI, and it's called the Judicial Branch Political Act. This bill has been highly controversial. It's basically about restricting actions by judges and justices from being political, which is not something I disagree with. I don't think judges and justices should be political. You know this because I had been talking to you about that as far back as like May. But the bill says that judicial officials cannot be a campaign manager, campaign staff, strategist, or have any title related with the action of campaigning. They're not allowed to campaign on the NUSA wall, agency walls, Skype, Discord, Twitter, or any other outlet used. They can, and this is important, judicial officials cannot show expression for political parties. If a judicial official wishes to campaign freely, then he/she is asked to step down or face the consequences of their actions. And then for the actual consequences, it says if they're found to be campaigning or just showing political expression, they shall be warned and asked to be deleted within 24 hours. And if they don't cooperate or continue to show political expression, then they'll be impeached. And then as a note, they say that he says that this act was created to keep our highest courts in the land away from biased decisions. This was not created to target anyone. It's time that we have fair rulings and decisions made for the sake of the United States' benefit. So what do you think about this?
So I think you remember when you first joined the group back in it was the spring of last year. I was just about to become a Supreme Court justice, and one of the biggest issues I have with the Supreme Court was how political it was. We had one justice at the time who was no longer a justice, but he was running as the vice presidential candidate, and then for a brief period, a presidential candidate. We had someone else who was considering running for president. We even had one person who was running as vice president without a presidential candidate attached to him, just by himself. So I sparred with almost all the justices over the whole political affiliation, and I firmly do believe that justices should not participate in any campaign, be associated with any political party. I think that their goal is to be an arbiter of the law, and I know that this is a subject that's personal to you because you went through it, and you and I talked about it, and you know we even made moves over the summer to introduce a code of conduct that exists in real life. You know, like we shouldn't have judges expressing who they voted for, or saying, you know, I endorse X candidate, or I'm a Democrat, or I'm running this person's campaign. I mean, it'd be the equivalent of like Stephen Breyer running Hillary Clinton's campaign. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely. So what you're talking about is the judicial ethics code, which exists in real life.
Mm-hmm.
What people don't realize is that is not legally binding, because constitutionally they have the right to say whatever they want. I mean, under the very strict limits that the courts have issued via case law over the decades. But all in all, they have the same rights as any other American when it comes to the political opinions, the expressions of such. They even have the right to run for office. In real life, what will happen, though, is the American Bar Association will disbar any judge or justice who does so without resigning. But again, you don't have to be on the bar to be a judge or justice. So the ethics code really is just a recommendation that most justices, if not all, follow, and it's something they should follow. But as we see, it's not always followed. We saw this with Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the summer when she commented about Trump publicly in a very politicized way. She got a lot of heat for it, but she couldn't be punished for it because it is within her First Amendment rights to do. That's our problem with this bill. And when I say our, I say literally every single judge and justice in the judicial branch. We are unanimous in that this bill is incredibly unconstitutional. And in fact, on the bill itself, there's 3 pages of arguing between the judges and justices, myself included, have commented on it. For example, some judges, including like my comment I had, this isn't a partisan issue. This is a fundamental issue regarding the Constitution's rights. Furthermore, you've missed the point of our grievances. The point here isn't whether judges should or should not be politically involved. The point here is that this bill in its current form is inherently unconstitutional. And then the First Amendment is the very bedrock of our entire country. This bill restricts it. As elitist, quote unquote, as we may seem, as members of the judiciary, we too are American citizens. We too are afforded the same rights given to everyday Americans. If you want to enact these changes, then amend the Constitution. It was very frustrating seeing Apollo and then Jamil. Their entire argument was that even though this is a quote from Apollo, claiming that this bill will restrict freedom of speech, it may do so, but I could quote each and every one of you wanting to make NUSA more realistic. What he doesn't understand is that this bill is not realistic, it's just unconstitutional. And what the legislature doesn't seem to understand is that you can't just strip away constitutional rights through legislation because it might be popular. And it's passed, and I don't know if the president is going to sign it. He might sign it just to let it go to the courts and have it be overturned.
Yeah, but I think in this instance, I mean, the bills, I personally, in its current form, I think could use some minor adjustments, and I think that you and I agree on a majority of things, but on this issue, we're diverging, because I think that, as we know, there are reasonable restrictions placed in the First Amendment, and I'm not saying that saying "I support they sinned" is the equivalent of shouting "fire" in a crowded theater, but which is obviously not protected by the First Amendment, right? But so I think that in real life, it's kind of just standard procedure. Judges know that this is their career. They are meant to interpret the law at whatever level of court system they're at. They know that's their job. But what happens in our USA is that in general, we have judges who want to be more involved in the group than just read law. So we have some of them running for president or some of them managing campaigns. And one thing, I mean, the last time in recent, from history that I remember would be Charles Evans Hughes running against Woodrow Wilson in the election of 1916. And he resigned before he even announced his candidacy, which is the appropriate thing to do. And he was later renominated as Chief Justice about 20 years later, if I remember correctly. But my point for this is that I believe that there should be an attempt made at a code of conduct. As I had a code of conduct written over the summer. I actually just used the real-life judicial branch one, and I modified it slightly for Roblox. I had it written. You and I tried proposing it, actually, when you were either a senator. I believe you just become a senator over the summer, and it was met with significant backlash. And what's going to happen is this bill is essentially dead on arrival in the Supreme Court because for the it's kind of ironic that the bill is aimed at preventing judges from becoming political, yet they're commenting on a political bill, which is aimed at stripping away their ability to do so. So I think that I see your point, and I agree with it somewhat. I think an attempt should be made in the code of conduct, but if we see that people are just repeatedly refusing to abide by the code of conduct as they should and as they do in real life, I think that there should be some legal steps made, because it's kind of just become common practice. The reason that judges and justices in real life don't generally comment on political matters at all, is because it's long-standing principle.
Yeah, I mean,
but last thing.
That's kind of our point, though, is that we don't necessarily disagree with the sentiments in the bill. The problem is that constitutionally, that right to speech is still guaranteed. And so no matter how good-willed the bill may be or how politically necessary one might think it still just is unconstitutional in current form. So we just, as members of the court, and where our job is to apply and interpret the Constitution, we can't allow that bill to stand. And Cot Warrior and I are actually going to write up an ethics code for the Supreme Court. The thing is that recusal already exists, and there are consequences that exist for bias and other things. So the bill itself, the bill is also very extreme. It is quite literally restricting Americans, because justices and judges are Americans. It's restricting their ability to voice their opinion. Whether they should is a different question. I think you and I would agree that they should not be doing any of those things. But legally, they can because of the Constitution. So what we've been trying to say is, if you want to do this, you have to amend the First Amendment, because it's like if there was an amendment that said that, and this is a very extreme example, but I'm going to use it just for clarity. If there was an amendment that allowed murder, and then Congress tried to pass a bill making murder illegal, we still could not support that bill, no matter how good-willed it may be, because it is unconstitutional. If they wanted to amend the Constitution, that would be a different story. So that's our problem with it. And I do, I, I don't just believe, I know for a fact that if it does pass and get signed, if it gets signed, it's going to go to the Supreme Court and it's going to be struck down. And I think that you'll see a very comprehensive opinion about why that's being done, so that there isn't really any cloudiness regarding the the legal thought that went into that decision. But I do agree with you that there should be an ethics code, which is something that's being worked on. But it's just very controversial, and it's sparked a huge division amongst the legislative branch and the judicial branch.
Yeah, and I mean, I try to on the podcast keep the news kind of like objective, and then our opinions as previous almost as political analysts, and not inject my own personal opinion. But on this subject, I kind of wanted to, because it was really the main thing I was focused on as a Supreme Court justice for several months, from periods of like March until June or July or so. And I proposed, I'm not sure if the Supreme Court still does this or not. I actually didn't like they did this, but you could propose almost like rules that apply to the Supreme Court, right? So, and then the Supreme Court would vote on whether those rules apply to themselves. So one of the rules that I proposed was that you couldn't run for office, and that you couldn't have political party affiliation or voice support for a candidate as a judge. So I don't think that resigning is I think there's a position to be compromised on. Maybe because one of the arguments, there was two arguments against me, was that one, I was targeting one individual in particular, and that was not true. I mean, the two judges.
I strongly believe that this bill was absolutely just targeting me. Like, even though we put a disclaimer that this isn't.
Yeah, it's possible,
anyone.
But I'm just talking about, for my scenario, I was accused of targeting both Northviews and Sufferpoop, who both ran for office, respectively, around the same time period. And I like both of them. I still talk to both of them on occasion, one more than the other. But it was never targeting them. And I remember Sufferpoop got mad at me, who's still a justice now. Got mad at me. One time we had a conversation about it, and he said I was targeting Northviews, and I spoke to Northviews myself, and I told him, this is not targeting you, this is just something I believe in, and regardless of who's running for office, I'm still going to agree with this. And I think that, right now, sitting here in January, approaching 7 months, 8 months since I initially proposed this, I still believe in it, and both of them are not running for office. So it really is something that I believed in from the beginning, and I think it's a very important thing, because I think that while it has never been established in a Supreme Court case, at least to my knowledge, that there are reasonable restrictions, better known as like time, place, and manner restrictions of the First Amendment, that, and I would agree that a justice saying they support a certain political candidate is not the equivalent of, like I said earlier, shouting fire at a theater, which is a time, place, and manner restriction. But I think that if you're a Supreme Court justice, it is not the appropriate time, it is not the appropriate place, or the appropriate manner for you to comment on any political matters occurring. And I also think it's inappropriate, and I have the utmost respect for you and all the other judges and justices in the judicial branch, but to basically say, hey, we're not going to listen to legal arguments that come in, this law is dead on arrival when it comes to the courts. So that is part of the issue to me as well, is that implementing a code of conduct is a suggestion. And I think that it's a good first step to see if it works. I think it's important to see if it works. And if it does work, I would say, okay, I like this, because I do feel like that you're compromising a little bit of your individual liberty to implement this bill. But it's almost like something that is going to happen when you take the job. You know that when you become a CIA analyst, you can't talk about certain things. You can't breach national security because it's not in the interest of the American public, and it compromises your job. So it's the same concept. If we set this forth in the beginning for future judges, have them sign the code of conduct. If they violate it, there should be consequences, because they, signed it promising to uphold the oath, or rather the conduct, and ensure that it's followed to their best personal standard. But I do think that this law is not a bad idea. I personally am not opposed to it. I know that you and I differ on that, but I think that judges commenting and saying that this law is not going to stand is interfering with the lawmaking process, and I have always believed that they should stay relatively out of the of that process and the political campaign process.
I mean, I guess the rebuttal to that would be only that regarding the commenting on the law itself is that what we're saying is that objectively the law in current form is just unconstitutional. We're not necessarily arguing against the points in the bill or that judges, we're not pro judges being political. We're just saying that the law it should not be passed because it's simply unconstitutional. So yeah, we differ, but that's fine. I mean,
and then just a last point. This isn't like a new thing. I'm just wrapping it up before we sign off. And it's the equivalent of like, so obviously, when was it? It was June 25th of 2015 that the King v. Burwell case was decided, and I think it was a 6-3 decision. And then Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Anthony Kennedy hopped to the more liberal side to protect the Affordable Care Act. And if John Roberts had come out in advance and say, well, I don't think that the mandate system actually is violating anything, or if some of the conservative justices in the court right now are a little more vocal in their political opinions, like, Antonin Scalia, who recently, like a year ago, passed away. But I think that really, since he died, they really have been very political. I mean, if Clarence Thomas came out in advance and said, well, I believe the mandate system of Obamacare is unconstitutional and the law should be rewritten because it is illegal in its current form, I think it'd be inappropriate. I think you should wait until the case is presented, until the arguments are heard, because it's almost seemed like the judges are prejudging before the case is even heard, because really they're supposed to not form their own opinions prior to the case being presented. So, and that's why in real life there's a Senate counsel's office in the U.S. Congress, or there's counsel's office across all state legislatures who analyze the constitutionality of a law or a bill, which we don't have, but the DOJ can always serve that function if someone chooses. But the Supreme Court justices should not be, because a lot of the time nowadays, and this is the very last thing I'll say, hopefully, is that a lot of it comes down to opinion. So I think that on this matter, you and I agree on the concept, we just disagree on how to implement it, right? And I think it also comes down to our interpretation of the Constitution. So I think that you're a tad bit, in our previous conversations, you said you're a tad bit more constructionalist than I am, that you more believe, and I'm more of like a living, breathing document kind of person. So I think a lot of this, the judiciary has become very much politicized these days, and I think that a lot of it is political opinion. So to come out and say a judge is for or against the law prior to it's even being passed, I think is something that should not be common practice as it is now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my final word on it would be, if you want to do this, amend the Constitution. That would be my final word, and I'd probably support it in private if it was an amendment. I just don't.
Do amendments still go through the Supreme Court before they get passed? I forget.
They do. They have to be approved by the Supreme Court.
I find it hard to believe they would pass a restriction on themselves. But, because actually, it's funny, this isn't in regards to our argument, it's more of just like a story of, when I proposed those two separate things, I don't believe a single person voted with me. I believe it was just me. And I believe that I was told that, kind of the same argument you're saying with the freedom of speech and whatnot, and that they're Americans as well, which I agree with. And but I believe I was alone when I proposed those two resolutions in the Supreme Court to make it a little more apolitical, because it really was a central issue to me, and that was one thing I wanted to accomplish before I left and wasn't able to. So I, as someone who's more of an outsider now and kind of just watches from the outside in, it's something I wouldn't mind seeing happen, and not necessarily in its current form. If the bill gets rejected, it's whatever, and I think that someone should do something. Maybe not the current bill, but something.
Yeah, so, I think I found it right here.
The what?
No, only one person voted aye with you, which was Synapsic.
Synapsic did. I'm actually kind of shocked by that. Which one was that though? Because I don't have it in front of me. Was it I think I proposed two separate ones. Because one was about running
Let me
for
look.
office, one was political party affiliation, I think. I just don't remember. The running for office
Yeah,
one...
this is another one which is 2 ayes and then 4 nays. Synaptic voted nay on this one.
Was it the political party affiliation one or the running for office one?
Political party affiliation.
Yeah, I think that the running for office one is a little more understandable because you really shouldn't run for office and focus on a campaign, and then also like be the candidate in the campaign, and then also be an impartial arbiter of the law. But the political party affiliation is technically something that even judges in real life do occasionally. So I mean, it's not as clear of an area. I think running for office should be a relatively bipartisan thing to support. But it was something I tried, didn't work out, and that's what happens. So
That's politics.
that's politics for you, as we cover on the podcast every week. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and close out, and we will begin. I want to say we'll begin uploading these more consistently on Fridays or Saturdays. The first episode came out on Sunday, but I think that depending on schedules, I want to adjust this to a Friday or Saturday schedule.
Yeah, it'll really just depend on how lazy we are week by week.
That also happens. It also has a slight bearing on work/school. So whatever the availability is, we'll try to work that out. And I don't want to record things too far in advance because it seems like things become so outdated so quickly that if I waited to post this until Sunday, it will become already outdated. So that's the schedule I want to try and follow, as well as making New York Times a little more versatile. And I've spoken to Tim about op-eds, and I've been doing more short interviews, and I like those. And I want to begin doing maybe live streams, maybe even recording political events and making sure those are accessible to everybody. But I'm liking the interview so far. I'm liking this podcast. I like this open discussion. In the future, I wouldn't mind having guests on here. So that's something to consider maybe for certain portions or even for the whole show. So we can look into that, even live streaming the show in the future. And I think that this has gone well so far. It's been relatively well received, and I think that I look forward to keeping it going. So, if that is all we have, any closing thoughts?
Just keep it trill. Keep it trill, guys. That's my closing thought. And
All right.
not a fan of Apollo.
Well, yeah, I think that message was well received. And I think that until next week, this has been the Upshot with Patrick Russo and Tim Geithner. Thank you, everyone.